All right, starting to populate. Good morning, everybody. Those of you joining us, welcome to our EnviroHouse webinar on herbs to grow, use, and preserve with our good friend Jenny Call. I am Gator. I'm your host here today, and I just want to let you know it's a perfect gray day for me, so it's probably a good day to get out and actually do some hard labor out there in the yard, you know, after this webinar, of course. So, gonna talk. We'll get started here in just a few moments with Jenny and Jan. Do you want to tell us about what's coming up in the next couple days or weeks? I mean.
Well, next weekend is Memorial Day weekend, so none of us are going to be on the screen. The following week, I will be in Oregon, so nothing that week. And then the rest of June, Jenny will be doing one again on weeds, pests, and non-toxic solutions, how to take care of plants without poisoning everything. And we'll be doing one with heat pumps on how to, focusing on the cooling feature, but how heat pump systems work and what incentives they are to use those and how to keep cool. And then I'm hoping to do one on composting with worms, but that one isn't confirmed yet. So the third one for June is still open. We'll be doing one in July. We'll be doing two. We'll be doing another one on EV, electric vehicles, and we'll be doing another one with Hal Ming, who's been with us before on pickling cucumbers and vegetables. And then I still have 2 more dates to fill in July. So
Excellent. It's going to be a fun summer. I will have to say, after hosting one of these webinars on heat pumps, we have decided for our family that's the right move too for our houses, getting a heat system. So these webinars, even as just as the host, I'm learning so much. I mean, everything I've learned from the pruning to the, now I'm interested in herbs, as you know, we talked about earlier. So those of you joining us, don't forget the way to interact, since you don't have an image or volume, is through the chat and the Q&A. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. Make sure your chat is turned to all panelists and attendees. There's a little drop down there that says to all panelists and attendees. We'll also ask some polls throughout Jenny's presentation, and it's a good way to answer and give her some information and feedback. And that way she can kind of, you know, answer any of the questions that might come up because of her questions that she's asked in the poll. I'm going to start a poll right now, and this is going to be kind of a sample of what the poll looks like if you haven't done one of these before. Now, this question is, here it comes. How did you hear about this EnviroHouse webinar? Was it through Facebook, Enviro News, EnviroHouse Workshop, friend, colleague, or family member, or other? Now, this is, your votes will be anonymous, so you don't have to worry about feeling like you're on the spot or whatnot, but it's good to vote. I'll give you probably about 30 to 45 seconds to vote, depending how quickly people answer the poll question or the question. So go ahead and get those in. Looks like everybody has answered. So let's take a look. How did we learn about us? How did you learn about this webinar? Facebook events is their Enviro News email. So that seems to be the biggest factor in helping us determine where we need to put some more resources there. So, all right, there will be more polls going on. So if, Janda, if you want to introduce Jenny, that works. You can take it away and send it off to Jenny.
okay, so Jenny has been doing webinars and workshops with us for a really long time. Gosh, I don't know, 2015, 2014, something like that when we started with you. And I've done them with Garden Sphere back to 4 or 5 years before that. So long history with us. That's the EnviroHouse behind me. At some point, I'm going to be back there, but that hasn't been announced when as yet. Jenny is presenting for Garden Sphere. She is a farm girl from Fife, and she's a teacher. She's got an ag degree in sustainable agriculture. She's been with us for a long time, done a lot of workshops, and so I'm going to let Jenny just fill that in and take it away.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Janda. So so I grew up here in Pierce County. I grew up in Fife when it was all farm fields. So I've been doing this even in the womb, my mom was out in our organic garden, harvesting and planting and all of that. Even when I was in the womb. So it's as if I was my whole life spent doing this kind of work. I really enjoy it. I'm a fine arts educator as well. So I teach all ages from preschool all the way through adulthood, it's been so much fun and I absolutely love it. Today we're going to be talking about herbs and how to kind of plan for them and plant them and grow them and then preserve them and save them. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Here we go. And sure, pretty good. We've got a lot going on today. So I'm going to go ahead. There we go. All right. So we are all set. So growing our herbs. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at some mint and some sage. Again, I am representing Garden Sphere, and everybody at Garden Sphere knows what they're talking about. It's a wonderful place to go to learn and see and touch and smell all these things that we're going to be talking about today. So herbs, I like to think of as a gateway to gardening because they take less effort to grow and maintain than your annuals, your vegetable gardens, because the vegetable gardens you have to turn over every single year. But herbs, most of them are going to stick around for as long as you keep them alive. So they're a really great way to build confidence in gardening. Depending on which herbs you choose, you can use them in your cooking, you can use them to scent an area like lavender, the smell of lavender, keeping the flowers out, the dried flowers. Most of them are quite drought tolerant, and so they're not going to need nearly as much attention, especially if you're planting them in the ground as an annual crop would. They are wonderful for pollinators. So our native bees and our native pollinators, plus the honeybees, that we have around that come out every year. This is just a wonderful way to encourage them to come into your yard. It helps keep them going. Having herbs tends to be a very sustainable way to garden in your yard because most of the things that you can grow, the herbs, stay evergreen, and we love that in our area because with the deciduous plants, it tends to be harder to kind of endure the winter. But these herbs will stay evergreen for you, most of them. And so you get that green plus the smell and the flavors, and you can use them in cooking. They tend to be really lovely to have as landscape plants as well. So you're creating this beautiful aesthetic in your yard. They can be grown mostly everywhere. And they just happen to be like super useful in so many different ways. You grow a bunch of chamomile and then you can have it as a tea throughout the year once you've dried it. So I really love herbs as the gateway to building confidence in gardening. Okay, here's the first question.
All right, here it comes. Let me get that queued up. Here it comes. This is, what is your experience in growing herbs? I'm new to gardening and have no experience in growing herbs. I've tried growing herbs, but not successfully. I have a few herbs, but I would like to know more, add more. I planted herbs in the past, but watering problems, and have pests and watering problems, and other answer in the chat. Don't be shy about that chat. I'm here to answer questions as we go along and keep you engaged. Give you a couple more seconds on that. You say it's a gateway, like, is it something you can do with a garden like you can grow regular vegetables and herbs in the same place, or do you have to worry about, I hear mint can be invasive. So maybe you'll get to that later, but I just.
Mint is a creeper. So it creeps, and every year you have to kind of bring those legs back into where you want it. But I have sage and catnip and rosemary kind of planted in very strategically in my giant garden areas. So
nice.
It keeps the flowers coming, good pollinators coming, and it smells really good when you're in the garden and you just rub up against it while you're weeding. And so.
Nice.
Yeah.
My cats will be happy about that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, here's the results of the poll. We can take a look. There you go.
All right, I have a few herbs. Would like to add more. Cool. So there's no watering or pest problems, that's good.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. So you want to add more. A lot of you want to add more. That's great. All right. There we go. So some requirements for successfully growing your herbs. Most herbs are going to want full or partial sun, and that partial sun means at least 4 hours of full sunlight a day. A lot of herbs will do way better if they have more than 4 hours, but you can get away with 4 hours. You know, ideally 6 or more, but there are some that really, you know, especially our evergreen herbs like sage and rosemary, and lavender, they can take the 4 hours, but you're just not going to get as many blooms and it won't grow as quickly. So you kind of have to take that into account. The more sun, the more blooms, and the more growth, right? And then when you do think about planting them, you're going to want to think about their soil and how well draining it is. So if you are in an area that has a lot of compacted clay, you're going to want to amend it if you're planting it in the ground, and you're going to want to mix it up, maybe build it up a little bit. And then if you're doing it in pots, that'll be easy. That's an easy one to do because, you know, most potting soils are going to drain fairly easily. You're going to need at least 6 inches to 3 feet of soil space, depending on your herb. Like rosemary, if you're going to do it in a pot, you're going to want a large pot because typically it's not going to want to live in a pot. But if you have a large enough pot, the rosemary will do fantastic. Whereas basil, you can get away with a pretty shallow pot. If you're going to be putting it in a pot, you can get away with a pretty shallow one for basil. But in the ground, obviously, it kind of depends on where your clay level is and what the makeup of your soil is. But plan on somewhere between 6 inches and 3 feet to start out for your herb. And then you have to kind of decide, like, am I going to do it in pots? Am I going to do it in raised beds? Am I going to do it in open ground? So this is kind of where you're starting your planning. You know, what do you have space for? Do you just have a patio? Do you just have a deck that you're, you know, a deck area? Maybe you're living in a multi-housing, like condos or apartments. You know, do you have a small deck area? What kind of sun do you get? So you kind of have to plan around that. And then they are going to have access to water. So if you're planting in the ground, the water will already be there, right? So once they get established, you really don't have to water them too much. You're gonna have to hit them with water about, I would say maybe once every other week in the summertime, and then not at all in the winter. But if you have pots, you're gonna have to probably water them a couple of times a week in the hot summer. And then, you know, depending on where they are in those pots, you may have to water them weekly. So it really kind of depends. So you're going to have to kind of do your planning here. May and June, right now, is the best time to get those herbs in the ground, in pots, get them established. You can find rosemary and lavender and sage year-round in nurseries, but this is the best time to buy if you're going to start in those 4-inch pots or bigger, because all of the nurseries around are getting all of that fresh stock, right? So you're going to have lemongrass, you're going to have lemon verbena, you're going to have a smattering of all the different types of lavenders, all the different types of rosemaries, because there's upright, there's creeping, you know, all the parsleys, the cilantros, oreganos, Greek oregano or like Italian oregano, you know, you're going to have so many just different choices. Thyme, fennel, you know, all these different choices are going to be available to you in May and June, right? The nurseries are loaded with herb choices, as well as like your annual herbs, you know, basils. You're going to find some really great established fresh basils that are ready to be planted. So if you haven't already, go to your local nurseries, go to Garden Sphere, go to Portland Avenue Nursery. You know, they're going to have just a wonderful selection of herbs, and this is the time to do it. It's also the best time to plant it. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. The temperatures are just right. We're like in the 60s. It's a wonderful time to get them established, because if it's too hot outside and you're planting, the root systems are going, and they're getting really stressed out. If it's too cold, they're not going to want to grow at all. So they're just going to want to sit there and be stagnant. So this is a really fantastic time to get out there, look at what you want. And most of these herbs, especially if you get them in the 4-inch pots, if you don't have time to plant them this year, at least you have them and you can start thinking about where you want to put them if you haven't gotten that far yet. Now, indoors versus outdoors. Okay, so this is a huge one. Now, there are a lot of herbs that you could start indoors. Most of them are going to be your annual or biannual herbs. So like the parsleys, the cilantros, basil, all the chives you can start indoors, right? Chives are fantastic. And chives, I've got an illustration there of the chives flowering. My chives are just flowering like crazy right now, and they taste delicious. But those are some of the ones you can start indoor and keep indoor for a shorter time. Now,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, but there is a question about Thai basil, if you have a quick moment.
Yeah, go for it.
It says, I planted the Thai basil in pots, but it died off during the winter.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you have them grow again in the spring? Should I bring them indoors in the winter, I think is the question. So.
Yeah, so basil is what we would call one of our annual herbs, and basil only has a 1-year cycle or 1 season cycle. So it's not going to continuously grow even if you bring it indoors. So you're going to have to replant it every single year. Basil is one of those annual herbs. Now, if you can get basil to go all the way to seeding itself, and you have it in a larger pot, you can dump the seed back into the pot itself. Then you can bring it indoors and you can kind of keep it going with the seed. But really basil, Thai basil, any of the basils are really going to be a one cycle plant. But they're super easy to start from seed. So you could keep seeding the space and keep it going indoors, and then put them outdoors, keep seeding. I do recommend with basils, especially if you eat a lot of basil, every 2 weeks, seed some more, because then you can keep that cycle going. And as you eat it, you're continually getting new basil. Okay, you're getting it all of the time, and you can keep that going outdoors during our May, June, all the way till probably September. And then keep it going indoor all winter long. So if you eat a lot of basil, you're just going to want to seed it you could go every 3 weeks, seed it every 2 to 3 weeks in different pots, and just keep them rotating. Yeah, I hope that answers that question okay.
Yeah, I think that was good.
Yeah. So herbs are all going to need a good amount, at least 4 to 6 hours of a full bright sun. And so, and they're going to need that to thrive. Now, if you have them indoor, the window light is not going to be enough to really keep them going. You get that full flavor, you get those sturdy leaves and things like that. And so you're going to want to get some kind of grow light. You can get small grow bulbs, the lamps, and stick them into a little receptacle, and just make sure they have a good amount of the actual grow light. And then when we have, we're getting into summer and really nice weather, stick them outside, because they will do way, way better once they're outside. And then, like I was saying, you could seed, especially with the cilantro, right? The cilantro seed goes to seed very quickly. And so you could take those seeds, put them right back in, and you start the cycle again and again and again. Now, many herbs get too big to have that time indoors, like lavender and rosemary, sage, our oreganos. They really need those temperature changes in the seasons to be successful year round. And those are our perennial, which means year round herbs. And so they need those harsh temperatures. They need that cold snap for a longer time so that they can go dormant and then come back full force. You know, it's kind of like putting them to sleep every year, like our apple trees and other things, you know, maple trees, they all lose their leaves, they go dormant, and then they come back to life in the spring. And so a lot of our big herbs really need that. Growing outdoor, you can also expand it. You know, if you have pets indoors, sometimes it's really hard to keep the pets out of your herbs. I know I try to grow some stuff inside, but they eat my parsley. So it's, I can't grow indoors. I can only grow outdoor. And, you know, there are some parsleys that really do great, like the curly parsley, curly leaf parsley, that will go all the way through the winter. And then it'll go into the spring, it'll seed itself, and then you can start all over again. And it's a nice biennial. And so you have parsley year round. It takes the snow and the cold weather very, very well. So, you know, there's benefits to having indoor and outdoor. If you have the outdoor space, either in pots or in the ground, I really recommend doing that during our main growing season. You know, you're just gonna have way more success. Here's our next question.
All right, here we go. I'm back. I had to reboot. I hope it didn't disrupt anything.
No, didn't even notice.
Now this is what do you want to begin with? That was the second question here. So seeds, plant starts, both seeds and starts, propagating, and other. So please check your question here and see what you want to do. Now you mentioned seeding. I'm still new to this. This is, if I'm growing basil, let's say,
yeah, will
it seed at a certain point? Like I just let it grow until it seeds? Is that what, or just put more seeds in is what you're saying every 2 weeks?
Well, I would really buy a packet of basil, maybe 2 packets, and reseed yourself. Because it takes a really long time, because what you're doing is basically waiting for it to flower and then form the seeds and then dumping the seeds. So it's going to be more effective if you just buy the seed and keep reseeding every 2 or 3 weeks.
And with some seeds, you start them indoors. Would that be the same thing, or can I just put them right in my pot? Like
basil right now, I'm actually starting in a hoop house. So if you can start basil, you can do indoors and get it started because it needs that warmer temperature. But once they're about 3 inches tall, you can stick them outside, no problem. But once we start getting warmer, at mid-June, we start to get a little bit more consistently in the low 70s. I would just seed it outside. Yeah, but parsley, cilantro, those I would just seed directly outside.
Okay, good to know. All right, I'm going to stop the polling. We got some good answers here. I'll bring it up for you. Thank you.
Both seeds and starts seem to be the majority here. Propagating, yep. Using, now I've got a question for the propagating question. So are you using cuttings? Like, are you using the rooting hormone and taking cuttings and rooting them? Or like, I'm curious what type you're doing there.
So if someone who's propagating, if you could answer one of the people, how do you do it? Someone did mention that their cat loves thyme and rosemary. She would actually sleep in it. Or my cat used to love thyme and rosemary. Thank you. Interesting. I'll let that question sit out there so the propagators can, just getting some pieces with roots is what one of them replied. Okay.
Yeah. So sage, I gotta tell you, sage will go to seed. And if you let sage go all the way to seed, which it'll do every year once it's in the ground or in your pot, you can let it go to seed, and then you're going to have all these little babies all around the plant. So you can dig those up and kind of move them around. Mint is fantastic because as long as you get a node that has a little bit of root to it, just snip it, put that somewhere else, you can share it. It's really cool that way. Sorrel also works that way. So sorrel, you can take the new shoots and move it. So that's a kind of a neat one. Cool. Oh, here, like that. So starting your herbs. So seeds, again, super inexpensive compared to the plant. So some seed companies, you can get them as cheap as $1.99. Okay, these seed packets, and they'll have, you know, more seed than you'll ever need in there. They're readily available. You can order them online. You can go to the nurseries. You know, Ed Hume has a great selection. Territorial Seed has a great selection. Most places have the Botanical Seed Company. A lot of nurseries have this smattering and mix of seed companies that they use, and they keep those seeds in stock. Johnny Seeds online, fantastic, really, really huge selection. So seeds you can get really inexpensively. You get a lot of seed in there, and over the whole packet, most of them, you only need a couple of plants, right? So you could do like a whole, you could do like 10 cells of in the seed starters, right? You could do a bunch of those, see what comes up, and just use what you need, right? And then you could just keep reseeding, like I was saying with the basil. I always just put a smattering. I just do like a pinch of seeds in each of my little seed starters, and then whatever comes up, comes up. I don't separate them. I just stick the whole thing in there with all of those growing out. Does really, really well. I do most of that most of the time. I do my parsley from seed. I do my cilantro from seed. I do borage from seed. Borage is really easy to do from seed. I do a French dandelion, which is really great. Makes wonderful dandelion tea, and it's so flavorful in your salads. It's called French dandelion. Is really good. Like I pinch the flower heads off, and I don't use the dandelion flowers, not yet. I have some plans for those, but the leaves, opposed to the dandelion that you find in your yard, which if you don't use any pesticides, you could totally eat those leaves too. But it's a wonderful herb with those in their salads. Chamomile, I just seed that right in, and I seed it really thick. So I may buy 3 or 4 packets of chamomile seed, and I put it all over that area. So I make it really, really thick, and that way I ensure at least I get a good amount coming up with like the German chamomile. So you've got some really good ones. Chives you can do by seed. If you have chives already, let the flowers go to seed, and there's going to be little tiny black seeds inside. Dump them wherever you want, or collect them and give them to your friends. You know, so seed is the way to go for a lot of plants. If you're thinking more rosemary, sage, lavender, even with like lemon verbena, you're thinking more of that route, get the 4-inch pot. You know, really get the 4-inch pot. I have been trying to grow lavender from seed for 4 years. It is tricky, and it takes up to 25 days for them to germinate. Echinacea or coneflower, you can do from seed, but again, it's going to take up to 30 days for them to germinate, which means you won't see anything. And it really takes a couple of years for them to get big enough to really put out. So getting your echinacea or your coneflower, getting them in the 4-inch pots will give you a really big jump start. I did do them from seed last year. I got a really good amount, but this year, they're only about this tall. You know, they're quite small, so they take a while for them if you do them from seed. Rosemary can be very tricky to do from seed. And that's why those are more woody stock, and like the rosemary and the lavender, sage. Sage tends to seed itself really, really well. But again, it takes 1 full year for those to start and become little babies. So if you want, pack your punch, get it in there now, get those plants. Mint. You can do either or, okay? And there's so many cool mints. I've got a variegated mint, and it is delicious. And not only that, it is beautiful. I use it as a landscape plant, but I also like to just eat it. It has a little bit of a fuzziness to it. So if you don't like the texture, but you like the smell, or you'd like to put it in things, it's fantastic for that. But mint comes in so many different varieties that, you know, if you would just want to start with the plant, and then you can take the root cuttings off of that and then put those everywhere, that will totally work. You like to drink a lot of mojitos, get the mojito mint, you know. So you have a lot of choices and variety there. Lavender, lots of choices. So you have ones that will grow up to 3 feet tall. You have ones that will grow like 6 inches tall. The different stems. Now, the difference with lavender is that you've got a Spanish lavender and you have your more traditional English style lavender. Now, the you want to get, if you're using it for scent or you're using it for, say you're putting lavender in your baking, using the flowers in your baking, things like that, you're going to want to go more the English style because you're going to get a lot of smell out of that, right? You're going to get a lot of flavor out of that. Now, if you're just looking for something that's great for pollinators, the Spanish lavender is great. You'll see the huge difference in the flower type. And there are very little usage out of, except for being a wonderful pollinator and drought resistant. Spanish is great for that, the Spanish lavender. But if you're looking for more herbal uses out of your lavender, you're going to want to go with more an English style lavender. There is a French lavender, has a real mild scent, not super culinarily useful, but beautiful, a very different leaf style than, you know, all three of them have a very different leaf styles. It's really cool. So we talked a little bit about annuals versus perennials. Okay, so again, in our climate, the annuals that we have, you know, are going to be basil, your cilantros, your lemongrasses, your lemon verbenas. They can be grown from seed. They can be grown for that season. Lemon verbena, if you want it to continue on and then keep it indoor, outdoor, if you have a spot that's not going to get super cold, you can keep lemon verbena going. But again, like your cilantros, your lemongrasses, your basils, it's going to be a one season type deal. And you're going to want to have to refresh that every single year. They like that warm soil temperature. One of the reasons why basil does so well indoor and outdoor is because it stays nice and warm inside during the winter time. So you can keep that basil going, you know, keep seeding it, you know, propagating it inside. The cilantro you can grow inside pretty well if you like to use cilantro in your cooking. Lemongrass does not do well inside. So it really is one that you're going to want to put out, let it do its thing, you know, and by mid-October, it's pretty done for the season. So that's more of a seasonal one. And we'll go through drying and preserving those so that you can have that flavor year round, okay? Perennials, basically everything else. So that means they're going to come back every year. We have our evergreen, like the sage, the lavender, the rosemaries are going to stay evergreen for you. We have some salvias that are super useful and they'll come back every year. The sorrels, the mints, so many others that are just, they're going to come back every year. You know, either they are reseeding themselves, like the chamomile, they'll reseed themselves, or the parsleys, they'll reseed themselves, or they're just that type of plant. They die back. So like the sorrel, that will die back every year. The mint will kind of die back, and then it'll pop right back up in the spring, just like a lot of our other deciduous perennials. But they are super easy. So once you get them established, like very little work. You might have to weed around them, give them a little trim. You're good.
We do have a question about rosemary. Okay. The comment is, my rosemary gets woody. Is it getting old and need to be replaced, or am I taking the cutting too low?
Oh, yeah. It really depends on the variety, but rosemary has about a 10-year lifespan as far as its woodiness. So rosemary a lot of times is grown, depending on the variety, will get very woody on the bottom, and then you'll have a lot of herbaceous material up on top. The creeping rosemary is the one that's going to stay nice and low. And you'll have less woodiness. So what I recommend is if it's more than 10 years old, what you're going to do is you're going to start a couple of younger varieties of rosemary underneath, and then you know, think about if you don't mind getting a little bit woody, what you're going to do is you plant the same variety that you like, plant it near your older plant so that it'll come back to life. And then as soon as those are, you know, say, you know, good 18 to 24 inches tall, you can cut back the older one to then give the new ones room for sun and whatnot. But they have, you know, 10 to 15 year lifespan really. as far as keeping the herbaceous material nice and low. But if you like it less woody, go for a rosemary that's going to be more of a compact, shorter rosemary. There's a lot of creeping rosemaries that only get like say 12 inches tall to 18 inches tall, and you're going to have less woody material. So it just may be that your plant is more of an upright rosemary. Some of the barbecue rosemaries, they call them barbecue rosemaries, they are very, very upright. And that's just how they grow. So they're going to be they're going to be very trunky. And then a lot of the herbaceous material is going to be up on top. Those are the ones that are super established or a little bit older. That's just kind of how they grow. I don't think a lot of people are aware that that's the nature of a rosemary.
So if you're replacing your roof, replace your rosemary. It's about the same time, 15 years, 10, 15 years.
There you go.
So I have 2 comments about propagating and then 1 question about growing.
Cool.
So
okay.
the propagating, the first one is they buy their Thai basil from the grocery store, eat the leaves, and then plant the stalks. So that's one way they propagate.
Okay.
And then spring onions, cut off the roots and plant in the soil, and it comes back after winter. And I've done where you buy green onions and you just put that little bit in water, let it grow, and then put it in a little bit, and I can never eat the green onions in the thyme, and I like green onions, but so those are just other ways that propagation is happening.
Yeah, cool.
And then the question about this, I think it pertains to this, is I have a bay leaf plant. I've been bringing it in the house every fall, but lately I've read and heard that perhaps I could just plant it outside in the ground. What would you suggest if they live in Edgewood?
I really do recommend that. I'm glad you brought that up. So bay leaf are actually a tree. And so, or a very low growing tree. There's a wonderful example in Seattle at Tilth, the Tilth Alliance up in Seattle, and they have a beautiful bay leaf tree, and it's about 15 feet tall, and it's about 10 feet wide, and it's gorgeous. And so planting it in the ground will encourage that root system to really put out some really healthy green material. It'll grow a little bit faster. Bay leaf tends to be a slower growing herbal tree. And so it will grow slow, so don't worry about that. And you can always prune it back to whatever size you wish it to be and the size you wish it to be. But yeah, putting it out in the green, that'll be good for it, because then it'll get those cold temperature units it needs to really grow successfully and give you the bay leaf flavor that you're looking for. The flavor will be more punchy. Yeah, so really put that out. You don't need to bring those in. They're hardy. They're super hardy. Good question. Very good question. So planting. We kind of talked about planting a little bit. Pots, raised beds. You're going to, again, make sure you use a potting or raised bed mix in there, okay? You're not gonna just use a planting mix. I do recommend, if you are looking for, like, if you're thinking more along the organic line, if you look for OMRI certified planting and potting mixes, it's OMRI, and it's organic farms, certified organic farms. They all use this material, and it doesn't have any byproduct in it and anything negative that's going to impact your soil. Generally has mycorrhizae in it, and what that does is it helps the roots take hold, and it's like this nice symbiotic feeding system. The mycorrhizae feed the root systems, and the root systems feed the mycorrhizae, and it works really well. There's a lot of organic matter in it to help feed and establish those herbs. Those are going to be your best bet. You are going to want to get a vegetable herb fertilizer. You're going to do that probably once a month in that first year. And then after the first year, after they're established, hit it with the fertilizer in the spring, hit it again in the fall. You know, twice a year is probably pretty good for those herbs, just to give them a little boost for their growing. And you're gonna wanna water them 2-3 times a week, depending, you know, on the size and the soil that you're using, April through September, because that's gonna be our warmer months. You might find when we get into the 80s and 90s here, you may wanna water it more frequently. Just stick your finger in there. If it feels moist, don't water. okay, if when it gets to the tip of your finger. If you're not feeling any moisture in there, you know that you probably need to increase your watering during our hot season. You know, you can fertilize monthly, but once they get really established, you really only have to do it 2 or 3 times in the entire growing season. Looks like, do we have a question, or I wasn't sure. It popped up.
There is a question, and I'm taking over for Gator for a minute. He's dealing with a broken window and someone there who's came in to fix it. So
okay.
We had a comment wanting to know if, and that may be what you just answered, the vegetable herb fertilizer to recommend.
Yeah, I like to use the Gardener in Bloom. There's a Dr. Earth. Dr. Earth is fine, and also super effective. It tends to be a little bit more expensive than the Gardener in Bloom. Both are OMRI certified, OMRI certified. The organic farmers use it. I use Gardener in Bloom, and you can find Gardener in Bloom pretty much anywhere. I find that it is super effective, and I don't have to use very much. It's a granular fertilizer that you're going to put on the surface, work it into the soil a little bit, and then every time it gets watered or gets some moisture in there, it can do the uptake of the fertilizer. So it's a longer lasting fertilizer. So that I find that really, really useful. When we go
Gardener Bloom, is that what you said?
Yeah, Gardener in Bloom. Gardener in Bloom.
Okay.
Yeah, and all of the nurseries carry Gardener in Bloom. So, and you can get them in the small bags, you can get them in medium-sized bags, and you can get them in really, 25-pound bags. So, depending on your situation, you can really gauge how you're purchasing, And the smaller bags generally run somewhere between $8 and $10, and it lasts a really long time. So, yeah, it's the best way to do it. Yeah. If you're doing it in the ground, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to blend some compost in there. So I like to use like worm castings, add a little fertilizer in there. Do this before you plant, and really mix it up really good, but don't do it too deep. So you want to think more of like the first 4 to 6 inches of the soil that you want to mix it into, even less. You could even do 2 to 4 inches of the soil, because the roots are going to start uptaking, especially if they're new. Their roots aren't established, and so you want them to have really good access to that fertilizer. Once they're in the ground, again, about once a week, you'll see if they need it. Once they're super established, hardly at all. You're not going to have to water hardly at all. And that's for the perennials. Now the annuals, you may have to do more watering even in the ground, just because they're only there for that one season. It takes a little bit longer for the roots to get established. So like maybe midsummer, you don't have to water nearly as much. But you don't really have to fertilize, maybe 2 to 3 times again in the year. For them once they're established. And I really like this diagram. So you can do one is square foot gardening, right? Some of you might be familiar with that, where you have 12 by 12 inch areas in a raised garden bed, and you kind of divide out your raised garden bed in that fashion. And I really like this photograph because it shows you can plant a whole bunch of things really close to each other, and they still will thrive. They'll still thrive. That other picture there is mint, and it's coming back. It's a very well established mint, and it's coming back really nicely. I do have to recommend lemon balm. It has a nice lemony, soapy smell to it. The bees and stuff love it. Plant that in an area like with mint. You're going to plant it in an area where either you don't mind that it creeps and kind of spreads itself out, and you don't mind kind of wrapping them back up together, or plant them in a space where you can kind of confine them a little bit because they're going to want to crawl and creep into other spaces. That's just the nature of those types of plants. And the lemon balm will seed itself again and again. And so if you really love lemon balm, you can just keep letting it seed itself in that spot and you'll have a really nice bushy lemon balm. End of February, early March, all the way through until we get a really hard frost in November. So that's a really fun one.
Lemon balm, let me throw in there. Even when you put it in a pot, it spreads.
Yeah.
I can't get rid of it at home, and it got popped up at the Enviro house, which I didn't plant, but it's everywhere. So when I'm open again, if anybody wants lemon balm, I can share.
Yeah, you've got to cut it back before it flowers. So if you don't cut it back before it flowers, the birds really love the seeds, and they will eat it and they will spread it for you. So it's super prolific. But again, it's way better than having, say, shotweed in your space. So if you want to take over an area that will be covered, lemon balm's a great plant. You can cut it low and it can be a really nice ground cover if you just keep trimming it back. So it's a pretty cool one. We have all of our different types of herbs. So our evergreen are going to be more the rosemary, sages, lavenders. Oregano will die back. So we call that like a partial evergreen, but it will keep a lot of its leaves. Thyme is an evergreen, the bay laurel, we talked a little bit about that. Nice evergreen plant, right? It's going to stick around. It's going to give us wonderful landscape plant. Plus it smells good. They're useful. I love it, right? Herbaceous, that means soft leaves. Okay, very tender plants. They're going to die back. They are going to be our deciduous or herbaceous. So we've got chamomile, mint, all of the mints, parsley. Now, parsley is, I would say, a partial herbaceous because it will keep going. It basically takes like half of its plant and it'll die back, and then it'll keep like some legs out. And I use parsley year round. A lemon balm will mostly die back, but if you have it in like a protected area, like I keep it under my eaves, and I want a whole space of lemon balm, and I just let it go crazy there. It stays about 6 inches tall. Borage will die back. Oregano again, I have it in the 2 spaces because it's more of like a partial evergreen, right? So it's going to keep a little bit of its green matter. Fennel, chives. Now, if we have a really mild winter, you may see some chives that stick around, but they will absolutely, as soon as our temperatures get 55 or above, those chives are going to take off. So if you've got them established in a place about mid-March, you can start eating a bunch of chives. Catnip will die back, but it'll come back with a vengeance. And marjoram and tarragon, again, those are going to die back, but then they're going to die back like our deciduous trees, our maples and whatnot, and our fruit trees. They're going to come back and have that beautiful green leaf. Our annuals, again, are our basils, our cilantros, our lemongrasses. I put an asterisk next to lemon verbena. If you put it in a pot and bring it in, it'll come back once you put it back outside. Dill, annual, okay? So think about this, think about and get into your planning mode here, because if you plan out, you could have greenery and color 12 months out of the year, okay? Mix in your rosemaries and your lavenders, and then maybe put in front of that, put your mints and your parsleys, maybe some chives in front, because they're going to start getting color as soon as we get about 55 degrees consistently. Okay, and then save a little space for your annuals, maybe put those on the sides, because that that area is going to be an easily workable area every year, easy to access. So you can really plan this so you have herbs for use year round, which is fantastic.
We have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One is borage. Is it borage an herb? It also gets out of control and is hard to get rid of, is what someone's saying.
Yes, if you don't manage it properly and you let them go to seed, they will reseed themselves and they will take over a space. Yeah, okay. Very much like lovage. Lovage gets quite large. So lovage can get 5 feet in base, and lovage can get up to 8 feet tall. And so those are the types of herbs that you really have to manage your space, right? But borage, if you use those flowers, which are fantastic in lemonade, they're really, really good. And, you know, if you manage it, you can control it. You just have to, you really have to pay attention to borage. It's just like kind of like lovage. Lovage, you really have to pay attention to it, and you have to, you know, spend some time with them.
It's not low maintenance is what you're saying.
Not low maintenance. One of the reasons I don't list lovage is because it really is not, I mean, technically it is low maintenance because it comes back religiously. It has a flavor of celery. You can use the leaves, you can use the stalk. And it is a perennial, but it gets so large that sometimes it can, for people, stress them out because it continues to grow to about 5 feet in diameter. And you're like, whoa, this plant is so big. What am I going to do with this plant? You know, so it can be a little bit stressful for people who have smaller spaces, and they plant the lovage and they're like, oh, I didn't know it was going to get this big. Kind of the same thing with borage, except borage, you can cut that thing. Once you see those flowers coming out and you've used everything you want to use, cut it in half. It won't spread nearly as quickly. Yeah.
Nice. Last question that's currently here is catnip, and I've always wondered this, edible?
It is. Yeah. So there is a cat mint. You can eat all those. Okay. You can use them in tea. And in fact, catnip, dried and used, and we'll get to those, is fantastic in tea. My cats, I have some cats that like the catnip and some don't. And I figure out who goes in there and who doesn't pretty quickly. But it's wonderful in tea. You know, you mix some catnip, dried chamomile, and just a smattering of mint. Fantastic, right? It's really lovely. So you can eat it just like the cats can. All right, here's the next question.
Okay, what seems to be the biggest obstacle? Is it lack of space, not enough sunlight, poor soil quality, no easy access to water, cost, especially starting with plants, and not knowing what to plant and how to start, or other? You can answer in the chat. I will talk about poor soil quality. There is that website, and I'll look it up here. We can see where the smelter has corrupted the ground in the Tacoma area. So I'll get that out.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really cool one. Yeah, totally.
Let's take a look at the answers. I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds. There's a few who haven't. Get your answers in there. Yeah, catnip tea sounds like fun. I'll have tea with my cats now.
Yeah.
Someone said rabbits are an issue with gardening. So here's your poll. Share those right there.
Not enough sunlight. Yeah. So if you don't have enough sunlight, you're definitely gonna think more perennial. Lavender doesn't mind. I mean, of course they like more sun. Sorrel will be really good for you. Okay, so sorrel, it really tastes delicious. It's got a little bit of a tartness to it, the French sorrel. There's some really lovely herbs. Parsley, totally up your alley. Cilantro will grow in part shade, so that is not a problem there. You might want to think of growing some Johnny jump ups. You can eat those flowers. It's not technically an herb, but you can put the flowers in your salads. They're the little violets. You can eat them, and pansies, you can eat those. Add some color to your salads. Again, I know lovage gets huge, but lovage does just fine. Oregano will do great in partial. It won't flower nearly as much, but it will grow, and then you've got some really wonderful fragrant oregano to use. Thyme, it won't grow nearly as fast, but thyme will totally do fine in partial shade. And that's, the shade seems to, having the right amount of sunlight really, it can become an issue, but most of these you can totally grow. Chamomile does actually quite well in partial shade. Mint, it won't go to flower nearly as fast, and it won't grow as fast. which might be a good thing because mint really likes to grow. But yeah, there are a bunch of herbs I have in my front, and it gets some good morning sun. But by the time about 11 o'clock, it's in shade, and I have mint. I've got rosemary. I've got some thyme up there. I've got what's called a marshmallow plant, and you use the root. You dry the root and you use the root up there. I do have my lovage in partial shade. I have my oregano in partial shade. So just do some testing. Chives will do okay in partial shade. So I know you've got some choices there. So when we're going into, I saw a lot of the obstacles there. A lot of those I think I talked about, but there's always tricks. You can always like get around some of those issues. Drying and preserving herbs. Now this is where we can keep some of these that are, say, herbaceous or they're annuals and enjoy them all year long, okay? So when we're thinking about harvesting, we want to harvest before they flower, okay? And we want to harvest early in the morning. So before 10 o'clock in the morning, harvest early. Because what happens is that at night, it cools, right? And so all of those oils get condensed into those leaves, and they're way powerful first thing in the morning. And so as the sun rises and as they get a lot of sun on them, what happens is that, just like, say we've got Crisco in our cupboard, it gets warmer, it becomes more liquefied and becomes more flowing through the plant. That's what happens to the plant itself. Those oils, they start moving around and kind of spreading out through the plant. And so when we harvest them, we want a nice condensed flavor. And so you're going to harvest them in the morning before 10 o'clock, hopefully. Do it before they flower, okay? Now, you can harvest the flowers when they flower, but by the time they flowered, you're not going to get the bold flavor that you're looking for from the leaves. So you may want to harvest just the flower from there. You're going to want to use a clean cutting tool, because anytime you harvest an herb, you want a nice clean cut. And then you're going to harvest most of that stem. So you're going to want to harvest about 2/3 of the stem, okay, of that herb. Very, very gently wash them. Put it on like super light flow in the kitchen, when you're washing them, because you don't want to disturb them too much. You don't want to press them. You don't want to compress your herb too much because that releases the oils, and you don't want to release those. You want to keep them, again, nice and condensed in those leaf material. Kind of give them a gentle shake, get a lot of the extra moisture off of them. Let them air dry, okay? You're not gonna tamp them dry, because then you risk breakage, you risk squishing the leaves or denting them or anything like that, and that will cause the oils to release in those sections. And so, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for them to dry fully before you start to process them, okay? You can, like with mint, you could very gently pinch off the leaves on their stalk and then lay them out to dry, air dry, or leave them on the stalk. Anything that's really small, like the oreganos and the thymes, you're going to want to just leave the whole stalk on there, let it completely air dry, and then we go on to the whole process. I can't emphasize try not to squish or disturb the leaves too much during the harvesting process. Now with the flower, you want to get the flower full bloom, okay? So if you're looking for harvesting flowers, like our chamomiles, our lavenders, full bloom, okay? You don't want to wait until they've already started to die back. So you really kind of have to pay attention to them. You start seeing the flower buds, really looking for when they're fully open. You want to get them as a young open flower. Again, harvesting in the morning as soon as they open up, because some of our flowers, they close up with with the dark. And so you kind of have to wait. Like if you're harvesting, I know dandelions are not an herb, but technically they are an herb because you can use them in all kinds of cool things. Herbs are what you consider, right? Just like our weeds. A weed is a weed, only if it's where you don't want it. And so they close up. So if you want to harvest them, you have to wait till they open up. If you're doing the flower. So wait till they open up. Generally it's with the sunrise. And then harvest first thing in the morning. Again, same thing with the leaves. You're gonna use a clean cutting tool. You're gonna clip the whole stem of the flower, okay, and or the whole head of the flower, like with the chamomile there. You can see the German chamomile. I clip the whole head, and you're just gonna kind of look at it, give it a very gentle shake or a gentle blow, get insects, debris off of it. Okay, there's always going to be a few little tiny spiders or little tiny things in there that are gonna hang out. But you're going to want to very gently kind of clean them off a little bit. You're not going to wash them, okay? Because if you wash them, generally it completely destroys the flower. Okay, so you're not going to actually wash the flowers, but you're going to kind of gently shake them out. Okay, you're going to take those stems or the flower heads, and you're going to, if you've got the stems, you're going to tie small bundles together at the base, and if they're heads, you're going to put them, I like to use paper towels because then it kind of keeps them dry, right? Kind of sucks in that moisture, and you're going to lie them flat. You don't want to layer them. You want one layer of the flower heads, and you don't want them to overlap, because what can happen overlapping is that they don't get the airflow that they need. If you have a screen, a very fine, like even the window screens, you know, that we have in our homes, those work so great. So you can buy rolls of that screen, put it on a wooden frame. It is fantastic for drying. So that's when you could put the bundles on if you don't have a place to hang them, or put all of your stem flowers, put all their head flowers, and then you get a really nice overflow. What you're going to want to do is you're going to put a screen down and put a screen on top. Okay, so you keep bugs and whatnot out of there too. But if you can do that, it works wonderful. If not, just paper towel, lay it down, paper towel on top, just let them sit there and dry. So here are a lot of cool drying methods. You can do it in dehydrators. These are a couple of different dehydrators. So there's a solar dehydrator there you can see in a yard. Those are cool. If you have time to totally build a solar dehydrator, they're way cool. I've got two different types. So I've got a stainless steel dehydrator, and then I also have a rack dehydrator. Then we have our regular plastic circular dehydrator. You want to make sure that whichever method you're using, they have to be completely dried out, no matter if, whatever kind of leaf they are. Because if you aren't completely dried out, what happens is that if there's any moisture at all, you're going to get mold inside of your jars, and it kind of destroys the whole batch. So whatever way that you do the drying of your leaves, just make sure that they are crisp, right? You want them completely dried out. And what happens there is all the moisture leaves, but all of the oils stay in those leaves. And so you have this like wonderful flavor. You can make your own herbal concoctions, right? You don't like a lot of basil in your Italian seasoning, but you really like a lot of oregano, and you like a lot of thyme, so you can really make your own deal. But if you want to use the flower and the leaf, say, of the sage, you're going to want to hang them. Okay, and you'll figure out what works best for you in your space. I mean, maybe you've got a dark closet and you can hang things kind of inside next to your clothes. Your clothes are going to smell fantastic, and you're drying your herbs all at the same time. All right, so you've got some finished leaves. So you're going to be able to take that stem, and you're going to just slide it backwards. So you're going to start, use your finger, and you're just going to slide all those leaves right off. You want to make sure that you're not breaking or crushing the leaves, because what that does is it opens up those flavor nodes, like in your leaf. It releases the oils, and so you want to keep them as whole as possible, okay? You don't want to break them because then you're releasing all that flavor. So when you start storing them, you're going to want to store them in a glass container preferably, okay? And again, whole. You want to store them whole. If you do like mixes, say you've got basil and oregano, you stick a little, you want some dried cilantro, you want a little thyme in there. You make your mixes in small batches. So I like to save old glass herb containers, you know, the shakers, the small shakers. And I'll do my combinations, and I only do them like halfway up, but I'll make them in small batches because I know I'm going to have to break up those leaves, you know, to make those mixes. And so I do them in very small batches. So I use it quickly, you know, so they're not losing a lot of their flavor. Say if I did a big batch of Italian seasoning that I really like, I would lose a lot of that potent, bold flavor because it's not going to get used very quickly. But, you know, you kind of got to gauge how you use your herbs. You know, if you use them quickly and you make a mix, maybe a big jar, you go through that in a month. Maybe you make your own tomato sauce. And so you need a big batch. And so you'll make a big batch of your own seasoning, use that in your homemade tomato sauce, you know? So you kind of gauge your usage. But if you can, and you know you don't use it quickly, then you're going to want to keep them as whole as possible. So a glass jar with the lid, seal it up really good, and keep it in a dark, cool place. Okay, that way your herbs will stay fresh for longer. Generally 9 months to a year is the shelf life for herbs to keep that bold flavor. After about that time, then they start losing flavor. They, you know, get stale. Okay, so you're going to have to kind of replenish it. If you don't mind, you can, you know, keep them as long as you want. But if you want that nice bold flavor, 9 to a year is a good shelf life. Okay. If you have a vacuum sealer, even better. You can keep it even longer if you've got a vacuum sealer. Flowers, you know, you can display them. We've got some status here. We've got some baby's breath. I will remove, say if I've got lavender, again, I use the same method. I take it and I go the opposite direction of my flower to get all those flowers off. It makes really easy removal. And again, nice, tight, sealed, dry jar. Keep it in a cool, dry place. But like say with my coneflower, the bouquets last through the winter. You can dry your chive flowers. They make a fantastic, you know, dump all the seeds out, you know, in your space so you get more chives or more chive plants. And then save the flowers. They're a beautiful purple color. And those flower bouquets, they'll last a full year. It is fantastic. And I keep them in my windowsill so I can see them while I'm doing my dishes. You know, it's a really lovely way to keep the chive flowers around, and they dry fantastic. So yeah, you've got lots of ways you can use things in your yard, which is kind of cool. Do we have a question or?
No, I was just gonna throw that out there. It looks like we've reached the end of the presentation part. So yeah, if there are any questions, now's a good time to put them in the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah.
I did get that link up there. It's a dirt alert through the ecology.wa.gov to check your neighborhood and see where the smelter has affected the ground. So if you're thinking about growing in the ground versus in pots or whatnot.
Peter, you can also check, if you're in the Asarco plume, you can check with the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. They have a soil division, and if you haven't been tested before and you think there's a concern, you might be able to get a soil test too.
Yeah, and when that smelter came down, I remember when that came down, we watched it. It was really cool. They really tried to go around, and they hit about 80% of the affected yards. And what they do is they took off the entire top layer, and they would put down new topsoil over the whole thing. So most yards in the area have already been scraped pretty heavily. But getting the test is always a good peace of mind. But folks who are who've been in their homes for a long time, they probably have
that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, getting them scraped off. I know my partner who's here grew up on the north end and got to see all the yards being scraped off, and they do it for free. You know, the EPAs come out to scrape it off, and then they put the new topsoil on top. So most yards have been scraped and re-topsoiled. But it always brings, again, really good peace of mind to know, okay, so they're going to come out and test. I just want to make sure. And then, when I lived in Proctor, we just did raised beds. We just, we knew that the yard had been scraped, so we're not too worried. So we put down cardboard and we just did raised beds. It made them super mobile, and it's just kind of easier to deal with. So.
Now we do have a question about soil. Does the soil and what's the components of the soil, does that determine the potency of the herb, excuse me?
Soil that's balanced, right? You've got good, healthy soil. They're able to get super established root systems. You are going to have better growth, but it doesn't necessarily mean affect the potency. So the root systems, if you can have soil, if you have a very high clay layer, say in the first 6 inches you hit clay, you may want to build on top of that. It will go down, right? Because everything settles in, but it will help push down that clay layer because the root systems are going to have a harder time getting through that clay layer. But if you can build that up a little bit, or do what I call a kind of little berm, kind of with a organic matter and whatnot, you can build that area up, and then the root systems can start working their way down and breaking up that clay layer. That really works. But if you have a balanced soil, you should be fine. I always like to add that fertilizer in there, even if I've got really great soil. Okay, I know this, and my folks in the valley, they've got fantastic soil. They have no rocks at all. It's just like beautiful, silky soil. But we still throw in, worm castings, and we throw in, here at my place, I do fertilize, because I know they're going to need a hit in the spring, and I always do it again. I do it in September. They need a little bit of a hit of a little boost. It's like giving a power bar before you go for a run, So even if you have great soil, you're going to want to give it a little bit of a boost. But yeah, dig down, see where your clay layer is. How far down is that clay layer? How far down, say if you've got a sage or rosemary, how far down can the roots go? And if it's less than 6 inches, do a small berm. It'll work down. It'll lower itself down, and over time, and at the same time you're building that soil, add worm castings to it, add a lot of organic matter to it. You should be okay.
Nice, thank you. This has been always informative. I love learning new stuff. So, thank you. Now, as far as some herbs growing on the windowsill inside, I know they're not going to get a lot of that direct sunlight. But are there some that might grow very well in the kitchen, in the window, that are easy access kind of thing? Or
parsley.
Parsley, okay.
Yeah, parsley can take a beating. Basil's going to be finicky. It'll do well for a while. And then once it gets to a certain size, it really needs needs a grow light, needs another source. Parsley, though, it's like, hey, I'm parsley. I'm just growing. It's doing its thing.
Here.
Chives will do fine too. For a while, they'll do all right. They'll do okay there. But I wouldn't keep them there year round. I would transition them in and out.
Outside. Gotcha.
Yeah. When you transition them back inside, you're going to want to have, you're going to want to kind of check them and clean them up for aphids and spider mites or anything else that's on them, because that can transfer to your house plants.
That's not good.
That's not fun. Yeah.
Excellent. We have 2 comments. One, before I go, thank Jenny for the great program and the advice you gave me on my own Zoom. That's from Hal. Thank you for the informative presentation from others. And then someone has a mole problem. Is there a good natural way to uninvite them? We have raised beds and have been trench composting for 3 to 4 years. Does that attract them? Maybe there are herbs that deter moles, or I don't know.
I know that landscape companies are like, moles bad. Moles tell you that you have great stuff under your soil.
You're doing it right.
This is a good thing. This is a good thing. You know, moles actually do a lot of really good stuff for us. We do have, they may not be moles. If they're going underneath your bed and they're eating your carrots, they are most likely rats. They burrow, and I have them. We all have them. We just don't know we have them. They're Norway rats. They are our local friends. You can't get rid of them. But
it's the cost of living on the planet. There are animals, creatures.
It's the cost of living here. I know moles are really annoying for a lot of folk. You know, you got them popping up in the middle of your lawn. They create this soil mound. But you have to realize you have great soil. Like, you have healthy soil. They like it. They're aerating for you. They are burrowing into that clay layer for you. They're tearing apart stuff underground to make room for these really good things, for the mycelia and the worms and all those critters. Take that soil above. If you have rocks in there, take the rocks out. That is fantastic soil. Put it somewhere else, you know, put it as a top layer somewhere else where you can kind of build the area. I know it's a nuisance, but what those animals are telling you is like, whoa, you've got a really good spot and you are healthy. There's no pesticides. They're not dying. Also, the rats and the moles, they're going to invite other predators. Okay. So you may not know it, but at night, owls, hawks, all kinds of things are coming in and they're feeding on those. So just, you know, you're going to have to kind of bear with it. Plant onions. They hate onions. Okay. They hate garlic. So a lot of times what I'll do within my carrots is I will plant onions in with my carrots. They don't touch them. They're like onions. Oh, they don't like it. They hate garlic. So you plant intercropping. Intercropping is fantastic. If you can have multiple things intercropped with each other, a lot of times they don't want to come. They're like, forget this. I hate onions. You know. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So plant a mirepoix, and that's. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Looks like we got all our questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Don't forget that this is recorded, and it will be available in a week or so on the Enviro House webpage, which is cityoftacoma.org/workshops. You can watch previous webinars with Jenny and with other wonderful presenters, and you can register for upcoming and see what's coming up. And watch for future stuff on that space, new upcoming webinars and videos. So always something there to learn about. Sign up for the email list and whatnot too. So.
Yeah. And I just threw in the chat the link for the YouTube on the City of Tacoma channel.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Which has, if you go to youtube.com/City of Tacoma /EnviroHouse, you can bring up the playlist for the previously recorded workshops there. And you can also go to the how-to videos, which Jenny has done several on many of the gardening topics. And Hal Ming, if he's still on our link here on our listening in, Hal, there are several that Hal has done also on preserving foods. So check out that how-to.
And a shameless plug for us, envirochallenger.com/videos. You can check out any of our videos. We made a bunch of educational learn about city services videos this year, so check those out. And of course, gardensphere.biz, I think, is your website. Is that correct? Yeah, so a lot of great info.
I just wanted to mention that if you are having a super issue with clay soil, plant root vegetables that have very long root systems, okay? Plant them with your herbs because it'll help break up the soil. Daikon radish, the plant behind me is called salsify, and really, really long root systems. And that will help break it up. And then when they've been there for a while and they've broken up the soil, you can pull them right out. But there are other plants to help with that, okay?
Great info. And as Jenny has said before, she's not the only expert there at Garden Sphere. So if you need help and you can go in safely, please go in and talk to anybody there. They're happy to help you there. They actually, I called them a couple weeks ago because I was investing in kiwi plants. So I was looking into getting some kiwi. So they were very helpful on the phone. So it was great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay tuned for more videos and webinars. And thank you everybody. See you next time.
See you in June.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.